It's a small window of time. I had a private sector client come to me a few years ago, and my colleague Matthew. This guy just couldn't get his message across in less than 45 minutes, but he wanted to, and he wanted anybody liked to speak from notes, and he realized that he could never speak from notes and clock in under 45 minutes, and so they sent us videos and transcripts of some of his 45-minute speeches, and our assignment was write a 20-minute speech that makes all these points. And so we did. And then our only advice to the guy was, read this, get comfortable with it. Get so comfortable with it that you've almost got it memorized. But keep it in front of you. Because that's a position of real comfort on the platform, is when you've got it in front of you, every word, but you don't have to look at it. Because you don't have to be nervous about forgetting, about something throwing you off. Which has happened to people who've tried to memorize speeches and it just kind of fell apart. But just get really conversant and comfortable with that speech and have it with you, and people will be very impressed because you will have a very economical and polished presentation that comes in within the window that's given you. Now, that's the extreme case. And the speaking from notes is always very good, as long as you are very comfortable with the timing. I remember one of my great friends I got to know just through this work. His name was George Elzey, and I looked him up when I was in Washington in 2000. And George had been a military aide to President Franklin Roosevelt during the war, and then he was a speechwriter for President Truman his whole presidency. He traveled around the country with Truman. And he just was a wise old gentleman and wonderful to talk to. And he died at age 98 about a year and a half ago. There have been a lot of speechwriters who've done a long time, so I'm happy to say. But I was going to give a speech to a group of cadets in a military school. And I knew what I wanted to talk about. I had a little history I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to relate it to their experience. And I was going to speak from notes, and I had 10 minutes. So, and this is about 10 years ago. And I called George, and I said, George, you're just going to love this. I want to tell you about a speech I'm going to give. And he said, okay. So I said, I didn't give him the speech. I read through my notes. I said, I'm going to talk about this a little bit, and then I'm going to say thus and so. So I didn't give him the speech, but just gave him the map of what I was going to be talking about. And he listened. He didn't interrupt. And I got to the end of it, and he said, oh, that's all very good. That's all very good. He said, you know the trouble, don't you? And I said, what? He said, you've got material there for 2 speeches, and they've asked you to give 1. And I said, really? He said, you got two right there. And I started going through it, and he was right. He was right. When I sort of looked at my notes, okay, now I know what we're going to talk about. Now I'm going to just sit here with my notes in the quiet of my office and kind of look over at the wall and at my notes and pretend I'm giving this speech. It really went on, 50% too long. So that's when I had to ruthlessly cut. So it's okay to speak from notes, but it's really important to know precisely how you're going to start, precisely how you're going to end, and then how you're going to fill the time. I always say as well that even with experienced speakers, sometimes they lose track of the time, and not completely lose track, but 8 minutes in, and they realize they've only got 2 minutes left instead of they thought they're just farther along in their window of time than they thought they were. You can save yourself by just knowing in advance how this thing ends, because you can always race to your conclusion. And you can say, I didn't get to cover this last point as much as I would like. If someone would like me to elaborate during the Q&A, I'd be happy to. But I really want to close on this thought, and then you're home free. It's the most painful ones to see are the ones who don't know how they're going to end, and so you can feel them circling the target, but they just don't know where. They don't know where to drop the munition.
And on that note, I'm going to get to my last question before our Q&A session,
Okay.
which is, what do you think about Trump's speeches?
Yeah,